Dave Fish is the former head coach of Harvard's men's tennis from 1976 until 2018. He was inducted into the Intercollegiate Tennis Association Hall of Fame in 2019. He's one of the brilliant minds behind the UTR rating system. Also with us is Alvaro Bedoya and Lucelena Perez, founders and directors of the Circuit Premier Tennis Tour, and Gabe Jaramillo, founder of Tennis on Demand. During this podcast, Dave will clarify the idea behind the UTR rating system. Dave, everybody hears about the UTR and a lot of people talk about the UTR, but especially for those that are newer to the UTR system, how would you describe the UTR in the simplest way?
UTR was an effort to say, if we all understood globally where we belong, that would work more easily. You're taking the French system and simplifying it. So we just use 1 through 16 and we simplified it. And then you make it global and all of a sudden everybody has a tool for interacting better. But the other part of it, Dominique, is that motivationally, rankings create a disincentive to try hard when you get below the top 10. It's fun to see my name and my picture if you tell me I'm the top 10 college teams in the United States. If you tell me I'm ranked 200, I'm kind of going, okay, it's actually a very good level. If you tell someone with a rating that they're ranked 100,248 in the world, that's not fun to hear. If you tell that person, look, you're a level 7 and you're getting awfully close to a level 8, all of a sudden that player says, great, how do I get better? And those are the two pieces that are so powerful about UTR or any rating system. And for college coaches, it was ideal because I could then tell the difference between a player in Moscow or Melbourne or Minneapolis or Miami. It was a godsend for me. And it still is for coaches. Every day they'll pick it up. They'll get a letter from someone. Where does this guy come from? Where does he play? And it's wonderful, but it should not be a chain. So I don't want to take credit for designing it. I have huge respect for the people who started it, and I helped to evangelize the idea, to tell people about the potential that this could have, enormous potential on tennis all over the world. And so we've just begun to scratch the surface of its potential to help.
How much a single match result can change anybody's UTR for good or for bad?
Very small difference, very tiny difference. And that the impact of that one match over 30 matches total is probably a greater impact by what's happening in the other 1.7 million players who are interacting on a daily or weekly basis. And so players that get upset by these little ups or downs are like people who are judging their retirement income based on the stock market changing day to day. They'll drive themselves crazy doing that. That's not a good way to think about your investment. When we invest in the stock market, we want to invest in solid stocks and hope that over time, even though the market goes up and down, we will have a solid investment over time. And UTR was always intended to help people better understand the process of getting better rather than the achievement of a certain level. And I think that it's gotten misappropriated, used incorrectly, because the national associations are not yet working together to put out a message. And then the events, we've left the events to be so open-ended that players come in, as you said, in the early rounds are very decisive matches, which is not anything like what we intended the system to be. We wanted to have play be in a very tight bandwidth so that everybody, and this is what happens in France, you get in the right level and you play in the right level, you play someone you're a little better than. If you beat that person in the nervous match, you get to play someone you're pretty even with. If you do that, now you've got 2 matches under your belt. Now you're ready to take on the better player who is only entering the draw at that round. And because we're still putting all the players in at the same round, we're having loads of inefficient matches. And so it's completely missing the point of ratings. And let me back up just further, is that ratings were always supposed to be just a foot in the door. If we have a way of judging accurately players' abilities, we can put them in the right level events that optimize their development. But ratings on their own do not signify potential or ability or necessarily achievement. And as you know, the tennis world has been so disrupted under COVID that that results are not coming in on a regular basis. So some people in some regions are getting no matches and other people are getting some matches. So we're even starting to see a skew in UTR, and I will assume that the same thing would happen if the world tennis number ever does come out. You know, all of these things are good in principle, but how are they in practice? And so, first of all, I'd love to say my hat is off to you, because I've always felt that one of the biggest drawbacks in the American system is because juniors are playing for a position to get to Kalamazoo or to get to San Diego to the Nationals. We bar the top international players who would be helping our American juniors get better. And that's a poor use of resources when everybody's there and itching to play with each other.
Correct. Thank you. Okay, the next question is that's something that happens here at the Academy a lot, is when the players think that playing against people with a lower UTR will decrement their UTR. So they're always thinking that they have to play against people that have better UTR than them in order to get a better UTR. How is that?
It's a great question. So let's imagine for a minute we live in a world where I could actually get my wish, and I would only play against players rated above me. Imagine how many matches would get played.
None. Mm-hmm.
None. So players no longer are used to earning their level. See, the problem in a points per round ranking system is that you can essentially try to jump levels. You can get to a level of competition simply because you're willing to go pay for that competition and get overmatched. And so you've actually hurt your own development. Even worse, when parents or coaches allow players to think that there's an easy way around something, they're turning them into cripples. Because no college coach wants to recruit someone that can't stand the pressure of playing down.
Correct.
Yeah. And so the coaches even gave us a term, they called it the wuss factor. They said, if we see that a person is going to default on matches, that shows that they're going to hide when there's pressure. And we know that no good player has ever turned into a good player unless they learn to play down with pressure, and they learn to play even with pressure, and they've learned to play up with pressure. So until we have presented people with a coherent pathway for playing down, even, and up in a sensible progression on a regular basis, such as it sounds like you're trying to provide, we will be failing to provide a logical system for players. And my contention has been that the USDA system is understandable. It may not be efficient at all, but it at least is understandable. You know, you get X number of points for getting through the level 4 tournament. And then you get to a level 3 tournament based on those points. It's very subjective, very uneven in accurately calculating level of player, but it at least is understandable to parents. Okay. Same thing with the ITF rankings. You know how many points you need to get. It's still a one and done system. It's still very expensive to compete in, but it's understandable.
Let's say an example, a kid that is 10.4 UTR, 13 years old, and is playing against somebody that is 19 with the same UTR. Since they have different physical abilities, and talking about that you said about the pressure, Is that the same level wise if they have the same UTR but different capacities, physical capacities?
It's a wonderful question, and I'm not sure we have enough data to be able to say for certain.
Okay.
You know, it's like having men and women in the same event. Is a woman who's a 10.23, does that really automatically relate to a man who's 10.23? We don't know because we don't have enough data. So to get back to the younger player playing the older player, because we don't know, what UTR was supposed to be was to give a tournament director the proper tools so that they didn't necessarily have an 11-year-old girl playing a 35-year-old man.
Okay.
And they didn't necessarily have a novice high school player who's 16 or 17 years old who has a pretty good ego losing to some academy kid who's 11 years old, because that kid at 16 or 17 is never going to play tennis again.
Yeah.
Correct.
They're not strong enough emotionally to know that. So you can bracket an event by saying, okay, this is a 15 and up, 15 to 18 or 15 to 19 event. You make socially appropriate groupings without saying a 12-year-old should never play. When Pete Sampras was 13, he needed to be playing against 18 and 19-year-old players. So the system doesn't need to be locked in. It needs to be flexible and have smart people like you exercising good judgment to put the right people in the right seat on the bus.
Gabe has seen, or we have seen also, that some of the USTA tournaments, when the parent or the player sees who they're playing and they don't feel like they're going to help their UTR, they pull them out. Either during the match, they're playing around the system pretty much before the fourth game, or even before the match starts, they just don't show up for the match. How can we address that? Is the UTR doing something about it?
We need to continue to educate parents, not to use UTR, not to try to game it, but to use it for the health and well-being of their player, rather than to let the rating use them.
Today we receive a call from one of the coaches that's asking how come the player that he has been injured for 5 months, the UTR went down 1.4. It was a 8.4 and came down to 7. But we have seen also the opposite here. Players that have been injured, that the UTR have gone up even though they haven't played for a while. How can you explain that?
So imagine that over a 12-month period, you have 30 matches that are counting. And so what's happening every day is that every day you go, the matches that you played 12 months ago are beginning to drop off and not be counted. And if they were very strong wins at that time, they will begin to have less impact on your present rating.
Okay.
If your results were pretty weak back then, and then you get injured and you've still got a batch of results within that period, and you had great results 11 months ago, and even if you're injured for 5 months, your rating could actually go up because the other players that you beat then might also be going up. And so this is what's important, is not to have people think that they need to have a reward every time they play a match. They need to be able to look holistically at their experience and ask good developmental questions. Am I learning to play down? Am I learning to play even? Am I learning to play up?
Now the ITF is coming also with a numeric system rating. Does it have any similarities with the UTR system?
Well, presumably so, because what caused them to want to do that 2 years or 3 years ago, they had said they had no interest in developing a world rating. When UTR began to be popular and spread, they began to say, well, we need to control that. And so they have put in a lot of resources to develop it. And maybe we end up with 2 rating systems. What's a shame is that 9 years later, after I introduced the idea of UTR to the college community, we still have people arguing over whose rating or whose algorithm is more accurate, when the whole point of the rating was not to be stuck on whose rating is best, but who implements level-based play best. And if we back up 60 years ago was when the French system was created. And 60 years later in the United States, we still are playing with an antiquated approach to competition, where we're teaching kids to chase points. They become point vampires. And they get addicted to it like sugar. That's not good for people. And yet the federations have all tended to adopt this points per round system for 2 reasons. One, it's easier to administer because you don't have parents calling you all the time complaining about their son's ranking. They know exactly what the ranking will be because that's how many points they got. So administratively, it's a dream come true. But developmentally, it teaches people to focus on the wrong things. And I believe that people predicted in 1995, when most of the world systems went to points per round, they predicted that this would have a bad effect on player development. And I believe it has.
We have heard that the USTA is not going to provide any more information to the UTR. Is some kind of conflict going on, or is that only gossip?
I don't know because I'm not involved. I think that we generally see tennis organizations not working cooperatively. That's one of the sad parts about tennis, is that we've watched for 60 years as tennis became a business, people began to compete to control a part of it, make sure that I still have authority over this area. That would be a shame if that happened, because UTR has had, whether you agree with every bit of UTR, it still has had an impact, and it's literally changed people's thinking about the way we may be able to put competition together better. We're far from achieving that goal yet, but it has still changed the conversation enough so that the ITF has done something that they had no plans to do. That's good for the game. That means that people are looking at how do we do this better. But as long as we're attached to the chain of points per round to get to Kalamazoo, the juniors are always going to say, well, how do I get my points? Instead of how do I get better?
Well, one of the problems that I see is that people don't understand the difference between ranking and rating. I mean, to me, it's one of the biggest problems.
I think that some confusion was, if you look on Tennis Channel and you see a person, he's ranked number 102 on the WTA or the ATP, and his UTR ranking is this. I think that added to confusion. UTR was supposed to be a rating, and that was, I thought, the brilliance of creating a distinction between a ranking and a rating. So in France, for instance, they will only rank, I believe it's something like 60 men players and 40 women. Everybody else in the country simply has a rating. And the only reason they have rankings at the top is those players are trying to get endorsements from companies. So they say, well, you've got to tell us who's better than this. But everybody else is rated and finds their level of competition very happily week after week. Can you imagine the impact in the United States if juniors could find that level of competition and adults could continue to play long after they finish their college or pro career the way they do in Europe?
I know you said it before, but if you can summarize to a parent that is listening to you or to a player that is listening to you right now, how can you convince them that it's better to play these UTR tournaments? How is that going to make them better?
Well, I would first encourage people not to, we call it, don't major in the minors. Don't pay attention to the things that have little impact. Pay attention to the things that have a lot of impact. Now, I don't care what your rating is. If players are being taught to back around their backhand and hit inside-out forehands now, what do we know that every coach should be teaching a player to do? They should be teaching their player to take their backhand down the line, right? That's just a developmental challenge that every coach has to teach his player to do. Players have to come to net. They have to learn to volley. The good coach has to be able to teach that player how to focus on the most important things, not the least important things. If you focus on the major things, the minor things will take care of themselves. And so that's a challenge. And I would also say to parents, how do you think Roger and Rafa and Serena got ready to concentrate in a match when they were playing for what, $3.7 million? Hinge on a point. How did they learn to do that? Did they suddenly at age 23 learn to handle that pressure? Or did they learn it when they were 12 and 13 and 14 and 15? It's all about handling pressure properly and learning to make good decisions. And the only way you make decisions is to play matches. And if you think that you can somehow avoid playing matches and avoid sticking your hand into the fire and feeling it burn, you're wrong. And so I would just encourage people to be more courageous. Understand that life is hard. It's full of challenges. And that's one of the best things about tennis, is that it brings the best out of you. It forces you to jump into something that you don't want to do. It's hard.
Thank you for watching Tennis on Demand. Please remember to subscribe.